It's a quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories or just a hello and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts when that reservation request first popped up in my inbox. The guest wanted to book my beachfront condo for a whole month, but said they needed to pay cash instead of through Airbnb's secure system. That should have been the first red flag, but against my better judgment, I agreed. I was so excited to have my place booked up for a solid month during the off-season that I ignored the little voice in my head warning me something seemed off. The guests arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a well-dressed man and woman who looked to be in their late 20s. They pulled up in an expensive luxury SUV, dressed in designer clothes and shoes. They had a fancy Louis Vuitton luggage and an air of wealth and privilege about them. I helped carry their heavy bags inside while making small talk about the weather and their drive over. Everything seemed perfectly normal, and I brushed off my initial hesitations, assuming I was just being paranoid. The first week of their stay was uneventful. The couple kept to themselves while I was there cleaning and maintaining the property. They politely declined my offers to change the sheets or tidy up, saying they preferred privacy. I didn't think much of it at the time. The man stayed on his laptop most of the day while a woman was often absent for hours on end without explanation. I assumed she was just enjoying the beaches and local attractions. At night, I would see the soft glow of candlelight through the windows as I drove by to check on things before bed. It wasn't until halfway through their stay that I started noticing strange things happening around the condo. Expensive liquor and wine bottles piled up in the recycling bins outside. I heard odd noises late at night, laughter, loud music, heated arguments in foreign languages. Different fancy cars parked for short intervals, then sped off down the street. And most alarmingly, strange men started coming and going from my condo at all hours of the night. Men in expensive business suits averting their eyes and hustling in and out after staying only an hour or two. My curiosity started to get the best of me, so one Saturday night I parked down the street to keep an eye on things. Around 10 p.m., I witnessed the first man arrive in a chauffeured sedan and hurry inside. Barely an hour later, another luxury car arrived with a different man who also went inside. Over the next few hours, I watched at least 6 different well-dressed men come and go. It didn't take long to realize my lovely beachfront home had been turned into some kind of illicit brothel right under my nose. I felt sick thinking about the depraved acts happening in the condo I had worked so hard to furnish and decorate. This was my safe haven, my special retreat from the stresses of everyday life. And now it had been defiled, turned into a den of iniquity without my knowledge or consent. I wanted nothing more than to kick them all out immediately, but the man had already paid me in full in cash for the entire month. I debated calling the police, but I knew they couldn't prove illegal activity without catching them in the act. And did I really want to risk retaliation or even bodily harm if the couple found out I had reported them? Both appeared fit and strong enough to overpower me easily if confronted. As much as it pained me, in the end my desperation for that month's rent outweighed my moral outrage over how my property was being used. So I waited silently until the end of their stay, pretending everything was normal whenever I went by to clean or perform maintenance. The whole time I could barely contain my disgust and anger, but the promise of cash kept me quiet. I decided turning a blind eye was better than risking my safety over improper use that I couldn't prove. On the day of their scheduled checkout, I anxiously paced by the front door, ready to take back my condo and try to erase the memories of what had happened inside. But of course, the final nightmare was still yet to come. As the time neared for them to leave, I started loading their luggage out to the car. That's when I popped open the trunk and made the most horrific discovery of all: the hacked up remains of a body, bound up in trash bags leaking blood. I stood there in shock, my hands covered in sticky red blood, as the full weight of the evil I had allowed into my home came crashing down. The man and woman quickly grabbed me and shoved me into the back seat, threatening me against going to the police as they took off speeding down the street. For hours they drove, arguing with each other about what to do with me now that I had seen too much. I cried and pleaded for my life as visions of my lifeless body in a swamp flashed through my mind. Part of me thought I deserved whatever they did to me for my willful ignorance and greed. I'd allowed this to happen by ignoring all warning signs. But another part raged against the injustice and evil I had witnessed, determined to see these two face consequences for their heinous acts. As I oscillated between self-blame and anger, The couple debated whether killing me was worth the increased risk of getting caught. After what felt like an eternity, it decided it was too risky to kill me now and opted instead to threaten me into silence. They dumped me on the side of a dark country road with chilling warnings to keep my mouth shut or else. As their taillights disappeared into the night, I wandered aimlessly in the darkness, blood-stained and dazed. I knew I could never go back to that condo again after what had transpired within its walls. The ghosts of my negligence and greed would haunt me forever, a constant reminder of the high price paid for ignoring my own intuition. Now, the months since, I find myself unable to fully trust anyone I encounter in daily life. I'm constantly plagued by paranoia, obsessively going over every minor interaction for clues I might be in danger again. My ignorance opened the door for unspeakable evil to enter and damage my psyche in ways that may never fully heal. The lightness and optimism I once felt has been replaced by a lingering sense of suspicion and dread. I still wake most nights in a cold sweat, visions of that gruesome trunk flashing behind my eyelids. The dark underbelly of humanity revealed itself in the most traumatic way imaginable. I learned the hard way that you should always listen when your inner voice whispers warnings that something is off. Now I know evil can disguise itself with wealth and charm, patiently waiting to take advantage of those too foolish or greedy to recognize the red flags. While my physical scars may fade in time, I fear the emotional scars may stay with me forever, a constant reminder of what happens when you ignore your own intuition. Last summer, my family and I decided to take a much-needed tropical vacation to the island of Zanzibar. We scoured Airbnb listings and finally found a cute beach bungalow that looked perfect for our week-long escape. The photo showed a quaint house with two cozy bedrooms right on the white sand beach. It was in our budget and had great reviews, so we booked it without hesitation. The flight over was long but uneventful. When we landed at the Zanzibar airport, we took a taxi to the western coast of the island where our rental was located. The neighborhood was charming, colorful little houses and hotels dotted the landscape as we drove by. Palm trees swayed in the breeze coming off the crystal blue water. When we pulled up to our beach bungalow, we were delighted. It looked just like the pictures, like an idyllic tropical paradise. The owner lived next door and came out to greet us. He was very friendly and showed us all around the property. The kitchen was stocked with bottled water, fresh fruit, and other breakfast items. The bedrooms had mosquito netting draped over each bed for protection. We unpacked our suitcases and headed to the back patio to relax and enjoy the ocean view. That first evening, we grilled shrimp and vegetables out on the patio and watched the sunset. The sky turned brilliant pinks and oranges as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was simply magnificent. Afterwards, we ate by candlelight to the sound of the rolling waves. The beach house felt so tranquil and serene compared to our hectic lives back home. We all headed to bed early, tired from the long journey, but excited for our adventures ahead. The next morning, we woke up to the sound of tropical birds outside our window. We made coffee and enjoyed some fresh fruit out on the patio before venturing into town to do some shopping and sightseeing. The day was filled with exploring the island, bartering at local markets, and learning about the culture and history of Zanzibar. By late afternoon, we had worked up quite an appetite. We stopped by a seaside restaurant for some traditional Zanzibari food before heading back to the beach house. The flavors were incredible, a blend of African, Indian, and Arabic influences. After our long, busy day, my daughter said she wanted to take a nap when we returned. I told her I'd wake her for dinner in a bit. A couple hours later, a blood-curdling scream came from my daughter's bedroom. I sprinted down the hall and burst through the door. There was my daughter, standing on the mattress, face white as a sheet, pointing at the floor and shrieking. I followed her gaze to see an enormous centipede crawling along the tile. My heart felt like it stopped as panic gripped my chest. This was no average house centipede. It had to be at least 6 inches long and as thick as a finger. The reddish-brown body was lined with what must have been 100 tiny legs undulating as it skittered across the floor. I had never seen such a massive, venomous insect in my life. My eyes darted around the room, desperately looking for something I could trap it under. I grabbed the empty water glass off the nightstand and cautiously lowered it over the centipede. It tried to escape but couldn't climb the slippery glass surface. Hand trembling, I ever so gently slid a piece of paper under the rim to contain the angry creature. My daughter was hysterical, crying that it had crawled up the side of the bed while she was sleeping. We scoured every inch of that room but found no other creepy crawlers lurking. When my husband returned from snorkeling, I showed him our terrifying stowaway. Wide-eyed, he said he'd take it as far from the house as possible and set it free. I anxiously watched out the window as my husband transported the glass-encased centipede to the edge of the property. Once sufficiently far from the house, he placed the glass down and slid the paper out, allowing the angry centipede to race off into the underbrush. I breathed a huge sigh of relief knowing the venomous intruder was gone. That night, the three of us meticulously inspected every corner of the bedrooms for more unwanted visitors. I sprayed insecticide around the perimeter while my husband stripped the beds to examine the mattresses. But we found nothing, just that one enormous, unnerving centipede. Needless to say, none of us slept a wink that night. We told the owner of the incident in the morning. Mortified, he apologized profusely and assured us centipedes were rare inside the bungalow. Though he offered a refund, we declined to let one spine-chilling encounter ruin our vacation. We just became extremely diligent about checking our beds each evening before turning in. In the end, we still enjoyed Zanzibar and made incredible memories. But the centipede incident certainly scared us out of our wits and became the horror story we'll tell our African vacation gone awry. My daughter still shudders remembering that massive centipede crawling up to her bed while she was lying there unaware. It makes for a great creepy tale, though not one I care to experience again. I was so excited when my boyfriend Jeff and I booked a weekend getaway at a cute little apartment on Airbnb. We were trying to save some money, so we decided to give Airbnb a try instead of getting a hotel like usual. The photos online showed a cozy, charming space with vintage-looking furniture, fluffy white bedspreads, and beautiful sunlight streaming through big bay windows. It looked like the perfect peaceful place to spend a romantic weekend together after months of stressful work and school commitments keeping us busy. When we pulled up to the address, I was surprised to see it was in a pretty rundown-looking neighborhood, not as idyllic as it appeared online. The place was owned by a woman named Sandra who lived upstairs with her three young kids. Right from the start, when she came out to greet us, I got a weird vibe from her. She went on and on for at least 10 minutes about how hard it is being a single mom of three, but she's still able to rent the apartment out to make extra cash. Meanwhile, poor Jeff just kept nodding politely, though I could tell he was exhausted after our long drive and late night flight. Finally, Sandra left and Jeff, and were able to settle into the cozy studio. It wasn't quite as spotless and picturesque as the listing made it seem, but we were too tired to care. We immediately crashed into the lumpy bed the minute Sandra left. I fell asleep right away, but was jolted awake in the wee hours of the morning by a tugging on the blankets. In my half-asleep, groggy state, I assumed maybe a squirrel had gotten into the room or something, even though we were on the second floor. But when I forced my eyes open, I was horrified to see a small child attempting to crawl into bed with us. My blood ran cold realizing it was the owner Sandra's young son, probably about 5 or 6 years old. The sight of a child you don't know trying to climb under the covers while you sleep is utterly terrifying and such an invasion of privacy. I quickly shook Jeff awake and pointed to the end of the bed. When Jeff shot up and pulled the blanket away, the kid was clearly startled and just stood there frozen for a moment before Jeff managed to hurriedly escort him out of the room. My heart was racing as the reality of what had just happened said. We had no idea what to do next. Should we try to go back to sleep as if nothing happened? Stay awake in case the kid returned? I grabbed my phone to call Sandra, but it went straight to voicemail after multiple tries. Jeff suggested we just get out of there immediately, even though it was only 5 a.m. at this point. We both felt unsafe staying there as Sandra wasn't properly supervising her young kids. We threw our clothes on quickly and Jeff loaded up the car while I pounded on Sandra's door, but again no answer. At this point, we were completely freaked out and just needed to leave, so we hit the road right away. As Jeff drove, I contacted Airbnb customer service to report the disturbing incident. The rep sounded as shocked as we were and apologized profusely, confirming we'd be given a full refund and that they'd investigate removing Sandra's listing if she wasn't properly overseeing her children. I also made sure to note that Sandra was completely unresponsive when we tried contacting her immediately after finding her child in our room. We ended up driving 2 hours away to justify a hotel so we could try to catch a few more hours of sleep, but we were both still way too shaken up to actually rest. I couldn't believe how irresponsible it was for Sandra to just let her young child wander into a guest suite she had rented out to strangers. Anything could have happened if we weren't decent human beings. The thought of those tiny hands reaching for our blankets while we slept made me shudder. I tried to leave a review warning future Airbnb guests about what happened, but they wouldn't allow it since we left early. I could only hope they took the situation seriously and removed Sandra's listing. But for all I know, she continues to host guests in that apartment right now, still failing to supervise her kids properly. Part of me wishes we had called the police that morning, but in the moment, all we could think about was getting out of there immediately. After that experience, Jeff and I will never risk using Airbnb again, even though we used to love scoring unique and affordable accommodations that way. No cute apartment is worth risking your personal safety, and the peace of mind that comes with a professional hotel where you can lock your door and know no one will enter is priceless. I try not to beat myself up over ignoring the sketchy vibes I got when we first arrived either. I should have listened to my instincts. Don't ignore those gut feelings about a place or host, no matter how great the listing seems. Your intuition is there for a reason. I still have the occasional nightmare about those little hands reaching for our bed. My friends try to joke that it'll be a crazy story we laugh about someday, but for me it was just completely unsettling and traumatic. Having a kid crawl into bed with strangers is not remotely funny or entertaining. And Sandra's total lack of response made the whole thing even more disturbing. We're lucky things didn't end up even worse considering her clear negligence. The takeaway for us is that you get what you pay for. While scoring a good deal on Airbnb felt exciting initially, that bargain basement apartment definitely didn't deliver the restful, romantic getaway we envisioned. Next time we'll happily pay a little extra for the comfort of a reputable hotel rather than roll the dice to save some cash. Our safety and peace of mind is worth so much more than what we might say booking alternative accommodations. It's just not worth the risk or the stress of worrying about potential hazards you just can't foresee or control for when renting from unregulated hosts. At least now we know. I was so excited when my sister Jess and I booked a weekend trip to the big city. We found a cute little apartment right in the middle of downtown through Airbnb that seemed absolutely perfect. The photos showed a bright, charming space with stylish decor, nothing fancy, but clean and welcoming. According to the listing, it was recently renovated with new floors, appliances, furniture, everything. The location couldn't be beat either, steps away from the best shops, cafes, bars, and theaters. Jess and I plan to spend 2 days exploring the sites, trying new restaurants, and immersing ourselves in urban life. The Airbnb host had great reviews, with past guests raving about the apartment's coziness and convenience. I imagine us spending mornings drinking coffee on the private balcony overlooking the street, and strolling through the farmers market and boutiques just around the corner. At night, we check out the local music scene and lively nightlife. In my mind, it was going to be an idyllic girls' weekend with all the comforts of an upscale hotel, but more space and privacy. When we arrived Friday afternoon, my excitement quickly turned to dismay. From the dingy hallway to the worn welcome mat outside the apartment door, it was clear this was not the bright, renovated space we were expecting. Jess looked at me apprehensively as I unlocked the door. The living room was dim with dated carpet, thrift store furniture, and a strange smell permeating the air. I set my bags down on a lumpy sofa, which sagged deeply under even that slight weight. Turning on a lamp revealed dusty shades and sconces that looked original to the 1960s era of building. This was definitely not the stylish, refreshed apartment from the listing. The curtains were faded and torn in places, letting in filtered light that did nothing to brighten the gloomy space. Mismatched chairs flanked a scratched coffee table that wobbled when I set down my purse. I ran my hand over the nubby couch fabric and felt crumbs and dust bunnies clinging to the rough fibers. While Jess investigated the kitchen, I wandered down the hall to check out the bedroom and bathroom. Stained rug remnants lined the hall, covering worn and buckled hardwood floors. I had to watch my step to avoid catching a heel or twisting an ankle on uneven boards. The bathroom had outdated fixtures coated in rust and limescale. The tub and sink were dingy, with taps that shook and sputtered when turned on. Mildew crept around the tiles and caulking despite the fan whirring overhead. The bedroom was in the worst shape yet, with ripped lampshades and a comforter that was pilling and faded. I peeled back the blanket and saw large stains on the sheets underneath. Mystery splotches dotted the wrinkled fitted sheet, and I couldn't bring myself to ponder their origins. By this point, I was wondering if we were even in the right apartment. Everything was drab, dirty, and ready for a gut renovation. Jess came into the bedroom and grimly reported that the kitchen was equally bad. The oven looked unusable, half the renovated cabinets didn't properly close, and she wasn't about to try any glasses from the grimy cupboards. The Formica countertop was scored and peeling up in spots, while the linoleum floor showed its age with patches worn through to the plywood underneath. I sighed, thinking of the cute photos from the listing that had drawn me in. This bleak, almost creepy, space was nothing like the place I booked. Despite feeling deceived, Jess and I decided to make the best of one night and try to get our money back in the morning. We cleaned the least disgusting sheets as well as we could and tried to liven up the space with music and candles. Looking on the bright side, the location was still excellent and the owner seemed responsive in our messages. We opened the windows, hoping fresh air would cut the musty smell that lingered everywhere. I pulled out an extra sweater, preparing for a chilly night since the ancient radiators didn't seem powerful enough to heat the cavernous rooms. After a quick dinner, we curled up on a lumpy couch with cups of tea, determined to relax. Outside, the city lights beckoned enticingly, but we were too exhausted to head out. The next day, Jess made several calls to the host and Airbnb support. She learned other guests had complained about misleading photos and condition problems at this apartment. I felt terrible knowing others had dealt with this dirt and disappointment too. After some back and forth, we were able to get a refund and book a hotel for our remaining night. In looking for a backup option, I paid much closer attention to reviews and only considered places with recent, consistently excellent ratings. I realized I should have been more cautious with a new listing and unknown host. Despite the upgrade, that one night in the Deceptive Airbnb still left me feeling uneasy. The grimy kitchen and bath, mysterious odors, and stained bedding haunted me. But nothing compared to the next surprise that awaited in the living room. While gathering our things, Jess noticed something stuffed down beside the couch cushions. She pulled out a baggie containing what appeared to be sausages well past their prime. The sight and smell made us gag. We couldn't leave fast enough, grabbing our bags and racing for the door. I'm much more careful now when booking Airbnbs. I learned to thoroughly research hosts and read recent reviews for any red flags. If the photos seem outdated or disingenuous, I won't stay there. When I arrive, I always inspect everything thoroughly and sanitize surfaces. That experience taught me dirty surprises could lurk anywhere. I'm just thankful Jess and I got out of that disgusting, deceitful apartment without bringing home any unwanted souvenirs or getting sick. Now I know the signs of an Airbnb to avoid and how to find one that's clean, honest, and truly a home away from home. I was absolutely buzzing with excitement for the weekend getaway my boyfriend Josh and I had planned. He was taking me to the charming little town he grew up in to show me all his most beloved childhood spots. The winding dirt hiking trails carpeted in ferns that wove through lush forests. The cozy cafes with mismatched mugs that served muffins bursting with juicy blueberries picked fresh from local farms. The hidden lake outlooks with weathered picnic tables tucked under the sprawling arms of ancient oaks. Views stretching for miles over sparkling blue water. After 2 blissful days exploring the idyllic community and reminiscing about his happy memories there, we'd be boarding a cruise ship to set sail for a 7-day tropical vacation on the open sea. I pictured us lounging on deck chairs, icy cocktails in hand, as we sailed towards island adventures and late nights under a ceiling of stars. Since we only needed a place to crash for a couple of nights before meeting up with friends at the cruise ship dock, I found an Airbnb private room for rent in a house just blocks from downtown and public transit. At only $50 a night total, splitting with Josh, it seemed perfect. The listing boasted 2 tidy beds, free Wi-Fi, and glowing reviews from past guests raving about the charming home and friendly host. However, as our Uber pulled up to the address on the morning of our stay, I felt the excited flutter in my chest begin to fade. The neighborhood was downtrodden, with broken glass bottles littering the cracked and weedy sidewalks. The house itself had a sagging front porch overgrown with tangled bushes, peeling beige paint, torn screen door, a crooked gutter dangling by one nail. A far cry from the quaint small-town charm Josh had described from his childhood. But I tried to shake off my apprehension, reminding myself we'd barely be spending any time there anyways. When Josh knocked, the front door creaked open to reveal a tall, muscular man chomping on a toothpick. He had leathered skin, close-cropped hair, and grunted, "You the Airbnb," without making eye contact. We replied yes, and he beckoned us in with a tilt of his chin as he lumbered down the dim hallway. The interior was just as unkempt as the exterior. The floral wallpaper was yellowed and curling up in the corners. The matted gray carpet was stained with suspicious splotches. Ashtrays overflowing with crumpled cigarette butts sat on every surface, mingling with crushed beer cans to give the place a stale, smoky smell tinged with marijuana. I wrinkled my nose but tried to keep an open mind. Our host called over his shoulder that his name was Eat as he led us upstairs. I felt my apprehension rising with every creak of the steps under our feet. At the end of the dingy hallway, Eat opened the door to our room with a squeal of the hinges. My jaw dropped at the sight, or rather, at what I didn't see. There were no windows or curtains, just cracked and dingy off-white walls with peeling paint and a single bulb flickering from the ceiling. The only furniture was a sad little twin bed with rusted metal bars for a headboard and footboard, the mattress sunken deeply in the middle. A faded floral quilt lay crumpled in a heap, but there were no sheets or pillows anywhere. When I tentatively asked Ed about the lack of windows, bedding, or any other amenities, he chuckled, the toothpick bobbing between his lips. "Don't you worry, missy, you got old A here, and a black belt in karate. Never sleep a wink at night, so ain't nobody getting past me." His casual declaration definitely didn't put my mind at ease, but I forced a polite smile and nodded, thinking we could at least explore Josh's hometown during the daytime hours. I turned next to scope out the bathroom situation, hoping for better news, but the bathroom was somehow even more depressing and unsanitary. The pedestal sink was spotted with black mold, the base of the toilet ringed in thick grime. Worst of all, no toilet paper or even an empty roll in sight, just a bare metal holder and a rusty pipe snaking out from the wall. My heart sank at the thought of trying to use the facilities in their current state. Ed had already clomped back downstairs to his TV by then, so I tentatively made my way down to ask if he had any toilet paper. He turned from the flickering screen and gave me a puzzled look. "You should have brought your own, Misty." By then I was done. I didn't care about losing the $50 we paid online. Being robbed was better than trying to stick it out in this disaster of a rental property. I hurried back upstairs and had Josh wait outside with our bags while I called Airbnb's emergency line. Thankfully, the support rep was as appalled as I was when I described the room's condition. He immediately agreed to refund our money and help us find a safe hotel room elsewhere in town. I felt bad about ditching our host house without notice, but knew there was absolutely no way I could spend a night trying to sleep in that health code atrocity. We ended up in a bland but comfortingly sterile room at the downtown Holiday Inn and laughed over dinner about our horror house experience. But I'll truly never forget it. Now every time I book an Airbnb stay, I take a thorough video walkthrough when I arrive, checking locks, outlets, appliances, cleanliness. I bring my own linens, pillows, towels, and always pack backup toilet paper and cleaning wipes. It was a nightmare at the time, but taught me important lessons. To verify amenities before assuming they'll be provided, trust my instincts if somewhere doesn't seem safe or sanitary, and advocate for myself if a rental doesn't match the listing. Josh still jokes about me accidentally booking us into the Airbnb from hell, but that dingy little room was a valuable warning. Being prepared prevents disaster, and it really does pay to be a little paranoid sometimes. My best friend Jan and I were so excited for our weekend getaway. We had planned this trip for months, looking forward to some much-needed time off from our stressful corporate jobs in the city. We scoured Airbnb listings, searching for the perfect cozy cabin to rent for a few days. When we came across the listing for the cute log cabin nestled deep in the lush green woods, it seemed absolutely perfect. The photos showed a charming rustic space with wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, and big windows looking out to the forest. The listing boasted lovely wooded views from every room and promised a peaceful, relaxing retreat from the hustle and bustle of daily life. Jan and I immediately booked it, giddy with excitement for our girls' weekend away at this idyllic cabin in the woods. The drive up to the cabin, set in an isolated clearing, felt longer than we expected. The dirt road twisted and turned, becoming narrower and more heavily shrouded by trees as we got deeper into the forest. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, I immediately felt like something wasn't right. The whole vibe of the place felt off. The yard was completely overgrown with weeds and tall grass. The cabin itself looked worn down and neglected, not at all like the crisp, inviting photos. A tattered baby swing hung eerily from a tree branch on the edge of the porch, swaying lightly in the breeze. An old teddy bear with matted fur and missing button eyes sat propped in the swing, its remaining beady eyes seeming to stare right through me. A large plywood sign hung next to the weathered front door with Jan's and my full names printed in large black letters that sent a chill down my spine. That was definitely not there in the Airbnb listing. Jan and I shared an uneasy look, but tried to shake off the weird vibes. I figured maybe the place just looked messy from the outside and would be cozier inside. I couldn't have been more wrong. The inside was dark and gloomy, with none of the inviting charm of the photos. Dusty, dated furniture with mysterious stains filled the gloomy living room. Dirty dishes overflowed the sink, swarming with flies. The pungent scent of mildew hung in the air. Our footsteps echoed eerily through the silent cabin, the creaky floorboards screaming under our feet. I could hear scrabbling noises in the walls and dark corners that sounded like mice or rats running around. Jan and I nervously made a squeak through the small cabin to take it all in. Each room looked filthier than the last, painted in cobwebs and caked in grime. Nothing was bright or welcoming like the listing had portrayed. Jan and I just kept shooting each other incredulous glances, wondering if we should cut our losses and book a hotel. But night was quickly closing in, and we were in the middle of the dense, remote woods. We had no choice but to hunker down and try to make the most of it. As dusk fell, the empty blackness of the woods surrounding the cabin seemed to creep in closer. Long shadows crawled over the walls from the swaying tree branches outside. The place took on an even more sinister vibe at night. Jan and I crowded close together on the lumpy, stained couch, jumping at every little creak and groan of the cabin settling. I felt like we were being watched from the dark corners and woods beyond the windows. At one point, Jan let out a shrill shriek as an enormous rat scurried right across the living room floor in front of us. We stayed huddled up, wide awake in terror the entire night, too afraid to wander far from our one lamp that barely lit the room. Neither of us slept a wink as the night dragged on at a snail's pace. I had never been more relieved to see the morning sun peeking through the grimy windows. As I stepped outside to load up our bags, the breeze carried a harsh chemical stench that burned my nose and eyes. I glanced around for the source and noticed a rundown trailer tucked back in the trees nearby. Dirty people shuffled around outside, staring at me with hollow eyes. The hushed clangs and whirs coming from the trailer told me this was some kind of illicit drug lab ran on the property. Jan came hurrying out of the cabin, shouting that we needed to get out of there right away. As we frantically threw our bags in the car, I noticed a menacing man emerge from the trees, heading toward us with purpose. Before he reached us, the distant wail of a police siren pierced the quiet morning air, growing louder and closer. At the sound, the shady man turned and sprinted back into the woods. A police officer arrived and questioned us about our business there. We were shocked and disturbed to learn the cabin was a known haven for meth dealers and users and had ties to disappearances in the area. The isolation of the woods made it a perfect spot for illegal activity. Jan and I felt sick realizing we could have been in serious danger just by staying the night. All we wanted was a peaceful retreat, but we unknowingly walked into a den of horror instead. As soon as we got cell service, I called Airbnb to report the listing. They profusely apologized and said they would launch an investigation right away to figure out how listings like this slip through the cracks. I demanded our money back plus extra for the trauma we endured. They obliged and even sent us gift cards for a free future stay as an apology. But I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable staying in a remote cabin rental again after the chilling experience we had. Jen absolutely refuses to stay anywhere outside of major hotels now. We still get anxious thinking back on that weekend and feel lucky to have made it out unharmed. The horrors hiding in that cabin deep in the woods will always haunt us. I just hope no other unsuspecting travelers find themselves in a similarly dangerous nightmare situation. Trusting Airbnb reviews and photos is clearly not enough anymore. Our weekend of terror taught us vacation rentals can harbor truly scary realities behind their misleading listings. My wife Julie and I were beyond thrilled for our week-long beach vacation in sunny Florida. After a long, cold winter, we were ready for some fun in the sun. I had spent weeks scouring vacation rental sites for the perfect place. Finally, I came across an adorable yellow beach cottage on Airbnb that looked absolutely ideal. The photos showed inviting living spaces, a nicely updated kitchen, and a huge backyard patio surrounded by swaying palm trees. Even better, the rental was listed at an unbelievable price, hundreds less than similar homes in the area. After discussing it with Julie, I immediately booked a cottage for a week. We couldn't wait to leave our snowy little town behind and relax under Florida skies. The big day finally arrived, and Julie and I packed up our SUV for the long drive down the coast. The trip went smoothly, and we pulled up to our beach cottage late Saturday afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, lined with charming homes. Palm trees rustled gently in the ocean breeze. The cottage looked just as cute in person as it did online. A lush green lawn surrounded the property, and vibrant flowers bloomed alongside the walkway. Julie and I hauled our suitcases inside, excited to explore our home for the next 7 days. The living room was simple but very cozy, furnished with a large brown couch, a navy rug, and seashell decorations along the walls. We noted the cute nautical details like anchors and fishing nets that made it feel beachy. I was pleased to see the space looked clean and well kept. We wandered through to the kitchen, finding white cabinets, sea glass backsplash tiles, and modern stainless steel appliances. Off the kitchen was a laundry room stocked with fresh towels and linens. Julie claimed one of the 2 bedrooms, which featured a comfy queen bed and wicker furniture. My bedroom held a king bed and dresser. We were delighted with the accommodations so far, which seemed perfect for a peaceful couple's getaway. After unpacking our suitcases, I decided to take a closer look at the smoke detector in the living room. It had been faintly beeping ever since we arrived, and the high-pitched noise was starting to drive me crazy. I didn't want to listen to that all week long. I dragged over a chair from the kitchen and climbed up to remove the plastic detector from the ceiling. Peering closely at it, I noticed a tiny hole that seemed out of place. Strange, I thought. Julie came over to inspect it with me, also puzzled by the unusual small hole and odd wiring inside. This didn't look like any smoke detector I'd seen before. A sense of unease passed between Julie and me as we considered why someone would modify a smoke detector this way. She offered to check the bedrooms more thoroughly while I moved the furniture around in the living room. I slid the large TV stand away from the wall and felt my stomach drop. A tiny camera lens was mounted behind it, angled to perfectly capture the living room. Julie returned, her face pale, and told me she'd found a recording device under the bed. Our minds raced, panicked over the discovery of hidden cameras and mix inside what was supposed to be our private vacation cottage. It was clear now that someone had set these devices up to spy on us, the unsuspecting renters. We felt exposed and deeply violated. All the peacefulness and relaxation we hoped for had been destroyed. Julie frantically searched online for information about hidden cameras and Airbnbs as I continued sweeping the house for more invasive devices. To our horror, we uncovered additional tiny cameras outside on the porch and even in the shower. We realized we were being recorded in the most private spaces. The thought of a stranger monitoring our every move made us feel sick. Julie was able to confirm online that, while despicable, what we'd experienced wasn't uncommon. There were countless horror stories of Airbnb hosts installing secret recording devices to take advantage of unaware travelers. But it was incredibly illegal, punishable by years in prison in most states. We knew we had to act swiftly. Julie immediately called the local police department while I stood outside, shaking with anger and disbelief. Within an hour, police vehicles lined our street and uniformed officers flooded the property. The authorities allowed us back inside to gather our belongings, then cordoned off the house as an active crime scene. They reassured us they would conduct a full investigation and pledged to contact Airbnb right away. We provided statements at the police station describing how we uncovered the hidden cameras. Apparently, the devices were newly installed since the last guests left a positive review just a couple weeks prior. The police arrested the homeowner for video voyeurism. He had only been recording for a short period, but that offered little comfort. The entire situation still left us feeling disgusting and paranoid. Julie and I opted to spend the remainder of our trip in a reputable hotel instead. We attempted to relax on the beach during the day, but found ourselves constantly on edge. Every unfamiliar face put us on high alert, wondering if we were being watched. We cut our beach getaway short, no longer feeling safe or able to unwind. All we could think about was getting far away from that cottage and the nightmare we'd endured. Once we returned home, I researched ways vacationers can detect hidden cameras and mix to avoid being victimized. Experts recommended sweeping rooms with a smartphone camera, since the lens will often reflect back infrared light invisible to the naked eye. Also check for minuscule holes in walls, vents, clocks, or other electronics aimed at the bed or bathroom. It seems recording devices can be concealed just about anywhere by a devious host. Julie and I realized we would need to be extremely vigilant inspecting vacation rentals in the future. This was the most traumatic travel experience either of us had ever faced. Having our privacy breached so egregiously left us feeling shaken to the core, but we hoped sharing our chilling story would make others more aware of potential dangers lurking in Airbnbs and encourage hosts to thoroughly screen who uses their property. While there are certainly many wonderful Airbnb hosts, our frightening encounter was proof predators are out there trying to victimize the unaware. Travelers must stay on guard, thoroughly checking any rental space for hidden cameras or mix, and bringing their own locks and security devices for peace of mind. Julie and I learned the hard way that you simply never know who has access to a space or what sinister intentions they harbor. We'll absolutely be much more careful, wise, and selective choosing vacation rentals after enduring this alarming invasion of privacy. But above all, we're grateful the police were able to apprehend the criminal host before he could violate countless other unsuspecting travelers. When I left my apartment to go on a business trip out of town, I thought I had taken all the proper precautions. I felt comfortable renting out my place on Airbnb. The guest had rave reviews from other hosts and seemed polite over our messages. He thanked me profusely for my hospitality and reassured me multiple times that he would treat my home with care. Throughout his stay, he texted me updates on how much he was enjoying the area and my apartment. I started to think I had found the perfect Airbnb guest. Never did I expect to come home to the nightmare I encountered. As soon as I opened the door, I knew something was horribly wrong. The smell hit me first, that unmistakable, stomach-turning scent of destruction and decay. My eyes scanned the living room, taking in the overturned furniture, smashed decor, and stained carpets. I rushed through each room, my panic rising. Drawers emptied, linen shredded, belongings scattered across the floors. In the kitchen, rotten food covered every surface and ants swarmed to the piles of unwashed dishes. The fridge hung open, reeking and empty. My legs went weak as I took in the vulgar graffiti covering the walls, my possessions broken and contaminated beyond repair. He'd even soiled my bed, leaving it reeking and infested. I sank to the floor, hyperventilating. This was no simple mess from a careless guest. This was deliberate destruction. He had taken his time to violate my home in every possible way, destroying my possessions and defiling my personal spaces. As the shock wore off, I frantically took inventory of what was missing. He had wiped out my jewelry box, taking antique family heirlooms along with my cash savings tucked away in the back of my closet. The violation I felt was visceral. Those pieces had such sentimental value, passed down through generations. They were irreplaceable. I broke down, sobbing on the bedroom floor, surrounded by the aftermath of this stranger's violence against my haven. I felt unsafe and contaminated in my own home. The police came but had little empathy. In their eyes, I had brought this upon myself by trusting a stranger. Their indifference to my trauma compounded my despair. In the following days, I hardly recognized myself. I flinched at every sound, racked with panic whenever someone came to the door. Simply being in my apartment made me nauseous with the memory of that horrific scene. Staying somewhere else while the place was repaired seemed the obvious solution. But nightmares of the violence done to my home plagued me relentlessly. I couldn't escape the hypervigilance, sleeping only a few fitful hours per night. My friends tried to be supportive, but they didn't understand. They saw me as exaggerating or being overly dramatic, but they hadn't witnessed the extent of the depraved destruction firsthand. Worse still, they criticized me, saying I should have known better than to trust a stranger. Their doubt and blame compounded my trauma. I felt completely alone. In the following weeks, I debated whether to ever host on Airbnb again. Rationally, I knew most guests did not behave this way, but my sense of safety and control had been shattered. How could I ever trust leaving a stranger alone in my home after this? As I tried to reclaim my apartment and move on, I was plagued by one question. Why? What compelled someone to methodically violate a complete stranger's living space like this? The lack of explanation haunted me. In the end, it wasn't the physical mess the guest left behind, but the emotional one. He stole my ability to feel secure in the place I live. I became suspicious, anxiously scanning the surroundings wherever I went. I struggled to connect with friends, obsessing endlessly over the horrific images seared into my mind. For a long time, I couldn't relax in my own home. The sound of footsteps outside the door put me on high alert. I stopped inviting people over, ashamed of the apartment I once loved. In small but significant ways, the guest violation robbed me of the simple joys of living on my own. Reading in a cozy window nook, enjoying a cup of tea on the balcony, luxury eating in a bubble bath. The pleasures of home now carried a tinge of fear. With time, the physical repairs were completed, but the sense of security I once felt within my four walls had been irreparably damaged. Though I eventually stayed in the apartment again, it never felt like mine in the same way. I realized in some ways the guest had succeeded in taking something that could not be replaced. He stole my spirit, that carefree trust and comfort I once felt in my own space. Though I hated to let him win, I eventually moved out, needing a fresh start in a new home. I'm still rebuilding the basic sense of ease and security that living alone used to mean for me. It's a long process as I learn once again how to relax into enjoying my own company within private spaces. Some days are still a struggle, but I'm healing. That harrowing Airbnb experience taught me the hard way not to take safety for granted. My home should have been a sanctuary. Instead, it became the scene of a nightmare. But I refuse to let that stranger's cruelty forever steal the simple joy of making myself at home. For now, though, inviting others inside will have to wait. This time, I need to rebuild and reclaim that space for myself first. When I inherited my late aunt's condo in Miami Beach, I was over the moon. A free vacation home in sunny Florida right on the beach. It was like a dream come true. I had always fantasized about having a relaxing oasis in Miami that I could escape to whenever I wanted from my busy life in Chicago. Now, thanks to my aunt's generosity, that fantasy could become a reality. After going through the process of getting the deed transferred to my name, I decided to list the condo on Airbnb to offset some of the costs. Between the taxes, homeowners association fees, regular maintenance, and occasional repairs, owning property in Miami Beach didn't come cheap. Renting it out as a vacation rental whenever I wasn't using it would provide some extra income so I didn't have to foot the entire bill myself. I was new to Airbnb, but figured it couldn't be too complicated. I took some nice photos of the furnished condo, wrote up an appealing description highlighting its proximity to the beach, bars, and restaurants, and set a competitive nightly rate. Within a couple weeks, the booking requests started rolling in. At first, it was just for weekends or week-long stays, but the great reviews from guests kept my Airbnb listing popular. I was proud of my 5-star rating, which I strive to maintain by being a thoughtful host who responded quickly and made sure the condo was clean and well-stocked for each new visitor. Renting out the condo only when I wasn't using it myself was going smoothly and providing decent supplemental income. After about 6 months with no problems, I received an inquiry from a guest named Paul who asked about renting the condo for a couple months. He said he was a photographer working on a project in Miami and needed a furnished place to stay for the duration. The prospect of that much guaranteed income made me immediately agree, so we confirmed the dates and I told him I looked forward to hosting him. This is my first long-term rental, but I figured risks should be minimal with background checks and everything. When Paul moved in on the first day as planned and paid his deposit, I was excited to have my first long-term Airbnb tenant. He seemed very nice, telling me how perfect the condo was for his needs. The first month went smoothly with Paul paying rent on time like clockwork via the Airbnb platform. But everything changed in the second month. Out of the blue, I stopped receiving any payments from Airbnb for the condo. I messaged Paul to ask if there was some issue with the reservation or with making the payment through the site. He responded with apologies, claiming he had run into an unexpected financial issue that month but was working to resolve it. While a note about not getting paid, I believed his reassurances that he would get it sorted out. After another couple weeks went by with still no payment, I tried contacting Paul again but received no reply. Something seemed very fishy, so I decided to investigate further. I was completely blindsided when I received a notice from the city of Miami Beach about multiple violations for illegal short-term rentals taking place at my condo's address. Short-term rentals. But I had rented it out long-term, I thought, confused and angry that violations were being pinned on me. Eventually, it became clear what must have happened. That deceitful renter Paul had gone ahead and listed my condo on Airbnb without my consent, renting it out for short-term stays behind my back and pocketing all the rental income. Likely after the first month when his financial trouble started. I felt so betrayed and violated as I realized he was taking advantage of my property to run an illegal hotel operation. Immediately, I contacted Airbnb, trying desperately to get the fraudulent listing taken down. But their customer service, predictably unhelpful, said there was nothing they could do since Paul was an authorized guest with legal occupancy. I was so infuriated. That snake Paul was illegally subletting my property for profit and Airbnb was just letting it happen, complicit in the whole corrupt scheme. With Paul clearly having checked out ethically and legally, the bills started piling up without his monthly rent payments coming in. The mortgage and homeowners' fees didn't stop just because my tenant had turned into a con artist, and the city kept sending more warnings about accumulating fines for all the short-term rental violations. I realized I needed to take swift action to get control of the situation. I sent Paul formal notice that I was immediately terminating his rental agreement for non-payment of rent. Of course, he didn't voluntarily comply, so on the date of termination, I had to pay to get all locks changed, a final step in removing that scammer from my property for good. Getting Airbnb to remove the fraudulent listing he had created was the next headache. I spent endless frustrating hours on the phone with customer service supervisors, trying to escalate the issue to someone who could help. Finally, after a lot of back and forth, they agreed to take down the listing if I could provide evidence it was made without my permission. Luckily, I still had all the original long-term rental agreements with Paul's signature, proving he had no authority to list it on Airbnb. Even after I succeeded in deactivating the illegal listing, I still had to spend weeks untangling the mess Paul had gotten me into. I had to work extensively with the city to clear up and get dismissed all the short-term rental violations that had been accrued. I was fortunately able to avoid any fines, but only after countless exchanged emails, documents, and phone calls. I should have been more careful in seeing the red flags with Paul earlier. As a new Airbnb host, I was too trusting and learned the hard way what kind of scams and exploitation people will pull. If I had done my due diligence running a background check before handing over the keys, I could have avoided him completely. And I learned that large corporate platforms like Airbnb care about profits over people, so hosts have to stay vigilant against fraud themselves. Despite everything, I'm glad I was eventually able to reclaim my Miami Beach condo from that predatory tenant. After a months-long legal and bureaucratic headache, justice prevailed, and I can now comfortably host law-abiding guests again. The whole terrible ordeal taught me to be much more cautious screening potential Airbnb renters and crafting rental agreements to protect myself. I may have lost time and money to that scam, but at least I gained the knowledge and experience so that no renter will ever take advantage of me like that again. I was so excited to take a weekend trip to the countryside. I had found a charming farmhouse on Airbnb that looked perfect for a peaceful getaway from the business of city life. As I pulled up the long dirt driveway, I took in the sprawling green pastures and big red barn, feeling instantly relaxed. The host, an older man named Harold, seemed pleasant enough as he showed me around the property. But I noticed he kept giving me strange looks, like he recognized me from somewhere, but couldn't quite place it. I brushed it off, figuring he must meet a lot of different guests staying at his farm. After the short tour, he asked if I needed anything else. I politely declined, saying I didn't need a thing and was just looking forward to unwinding. As he left, his expression changed to a cold, hard stare that sent a chill down my spine. Something fell off about the way he looked at me, but I tried not to overthink it. I figured he was just a quirky old man who valued his privacy. Still, an uneasy feeling gnawed at me that I couldn't seem to shake. I woke early the next morning feeling refreshed and excited to enjoy a leisurely Saturday. I headed to the kitchen to make coffee and was puzzled to find the fancy single-cup coffee maker unplugged. How odd, I thought. I plugged it back in and started a fresh pot of delicious-smelling French roast. When I opened the stainless steel fridge to get milk for my coffee, I let out a shriek. The fridge shelves were completely bare except for a single item, a grotesque, detailed voodoo doll that looked exactly like me. Dark yarn for hair, a blue shirt I was wearing, and pins poking out of the cloth body's hands and feet. I slammed the door shut, and shaking. What kind of sick joke was this? Uneasy and rattled, I decided I needed to get out of the farmhouse for a bit. I headed out the back door to the pastures to go for a walk and clear my head. As I passed the red barn, I saw Harold violently chopping wood, his swings getting more frenzied and aggressive. He glared at me menacingly as I hurried by. I quickened my pace down the dirt road lined with wildflowers, relieved to escape his bitter gaze. When I returned to the farmhouse a couple hours later, my heart dropped. The front door was dead-bolted from the inside. I jiggled the handle praying it was just stuck, but no luck. Feeling a wash of panic, I then remembered I had brought my set of keys that Harold had given me at check-in. Handshaking, I quickly unlocked the heavy door and slipped back inside, making sure to lock it tightly behind me. My eyes darted around the living room, which was just as I left it. Tentatively, I made my way to the kitchen and peered in. The voodoo doll was now seated upright at the kitchen table, an open diary and pen laid out in front of it. I stood frozen in the doorway, the chill running down my spine. Not only had the doll moved from the fridge, but it was now in a new pose. Someone had deliberately placed it here while I was out. A wave of nausea passed through me as I realized this was no longer just strange. It was downright sinister. I debated leaving immediately and driving home, but ultimately decided I should stay and document the bizarre events unfolding. If things escalated or took a dangerous turn, I wanted evidence and a timeline of what had happened. I quickly snapped some photos on my phone of the doll seated at the table of the diary, capturing the eerie scene. An uneasy feeling gnawed at my gut when I noticed the doll's diary had a page filled with writing, an uncanny replica of my own tidy handwriting, chronicling mundane details in my morning routine so far. The level of detail was bone-chilling. This was moving beyond creepy into psychological terror. Over the next few hours, subtle threatening incidents persisted. My floral-scented shampoo had been replaced by a bottle labeled vomit scent, filled with a rancid yellow liquid. My favorite snacks I had brought along were tossed in the garbage. The handmade quilts on the beds were damp to the touch, as if someone had poured water on them. And each time I opened a closet or peered under a bed, the voodoo doll would be staring back at me with its blank, eerie expression. It kept appearing in different spots, sitting in chairs, tucked into corners, pinned inside the shower curtain. By Saturday evening, I had reached my breaking point. I went to Harold and begged him to let me check out early, offering to pay for the full weekend if needed. But he refused, a sadistic sense of pleasure appearing to emerge from tormenting me. That's when he revealed why he had targeted me. Harold confessed I strongly reminded him of a girl named Heather who had broken his heart back in high school. His unresolved bitterness had simmered below the surface for decades before exploding onto the nearest target he could find. Me, an innocent guest just looking for a quiet weekend escape. The final night was nearly unbearable. After finding the doll dangling from a noose inside my bedroom, I wedged a chair tightly under the doorknob. But sleep was impossible. All night long I heard heavy creaking footsteps pacing the hallway. Occasionally, they would pause outside my room. Shadows shifted under the crack below the door. I strained my ears in the darkness, detecting faint scratching sounds on the walls. My bedside lamp flickered on and off. Lying there wide awake, I feared the sun would never rise. At the first glimpse of daylight, I gathered my suitcase and purse and bolted outside to my car, driving off in a cloud of dust. Once I got home safely and had time to process the traumatic events, I reported Harold to Airbnb, sharing the disturbing photos and experience. They were very concerned about what I went through and banned him from their platform. I was shocked to learn I really did share a name with a callous high school girl who had rejected Harold all those years ago. His unresolved bitterness had simmered below the surface before exploding onto me, an unsuspecting guest with the misfortune of reminding him of the girl who broke his heart. I still shudder when I think how close I came to real physical danger, all because I picked an Airbnb with a mentally unstable host looking for payback. The cookie-cutter predictability of a motel seems infinitely safer than winding up an unwitting victim trapped in a stranger's psychodrama. My idyllic weekend getaway quickly morphed into a living nightmare, one I'm grateful to have escaped from unharmed, spared from the full extent of Harold's malevolent rage. Now I only stay in reputable hotels. Never again will I risk staying alone in a remote stranger's home without knowing the darkness that may lie within. My encounter with Harold taught me you never truly know someone's inner world, no matter how charming they may appear on the surface. I was thrilled when I pulled up to the charming little cabin I had rented on Airbnb for a peaceful weekend getaway. It looked cozy and inviting, nestled amongst the tall pine trees, exactly like the photos online. I couldn't wait to unwind and relax at this perfect remote retreat. As I hauled my bags up the creaky wooden steps, I noticed a handwritten welcome note taped to the front door. It was signed "Your Airbnb host, Mark," in neat cursive writing. I turned the old brass knob and stepped inside the musty cabin, immediately feeling at home. The living room was decorated in vintage ski lodge style with a stone fireplace, wool blankets on the distressed leather sofa, and antique snowshoes mounted on the knotty pine walls. I set my bags down and explored the kitchen, which was fully stocked with cooking utensils and snacks. The retro turquoise oven and speckled formica countertops gave it a 1950s vibe. I opened the pantry expecting some non-perishable food items provided by the host, but it was completely empty. In the bright and tidy bathroom, I found fresh towels neatly folded by the sink and travel-sized toiletries in a basket. The white clawfoot tub looked so inviting for a relaxing bath. I made a mental note to stop by the market in town and pick up a few groceries and a bottle of wine later. I headed out onto the back deck to soak in the sweeping mountain views. The only sound was the gentle breeze through the tall pines. A family of deer was grazing in the backyard near a small pond. After eating a quick snack at the cute little bistro table on the deck, I went back inside to unpack and get settled. The simple pine bedroom only contained a bed, nightstand, and dresser. I put my clothes in the empty drawers and popped my toiletries in the bathroom. Even though it was only late afternoon, I was excited to climb under the covers and take a nap after the long drive. As I pulled back the quilted bedding, I noticed something peculiar. Tiny holes were neatly drilled into the wooden headboard in a straight line. They were barely noticeable unless you leaned in close. I ran my fingers over them, confused about what they could be for. Nail holes. Some strange decorative detail. I decided to ask the host about it later. I fluffed the pillows and quickly dozed off, the remote location making me feel safe and secure. A few hours later, I awoke feeling energized and ready to explore the nearby town. On my way out, I stopped in the bathroom to freshen up. As I washed my hands, I noticed another tiny hole tucked behind the toilet tank. Strange, I thought. Then I spotted another by the baseboard under the sink. My senses heightened, I searched for more holes around the bathroom. Inside the closet, under the clawfoot tub, behind the curtains, nothing seemed out of place. Just those two odd holes. I made a mental note to also ask the host about this when I spoke to him later. Driving into town, I couldn't shake the weird feeling. Why were there tiny holes only in the bedroom and bathroom? I stopped at the local grocery store and loaded up on food and wine, trying to brush it off. But the more I thought about it, the more sinister it seemed. After checking out, I decided to grab dinner in town and do some more investigating back at the cabin before meeting the host later that evening. Sitting in the crowded diner, I sipped coffee and considered the possibilities. Was the host spying on guests? Were they part of something criminal? I paid the bill and headed back, determined to get to the bottom of it. Pulling into the driveway, the cabin seemed darker and more ominous than earlier that day. I slowly walked inside, flipping on lights in every room. I started my search in the living room, carefully inspecting behind furniture and under decor. Finding nothing, I moved to the kitchen. As I searched through drawers and cabinets, my heart sank. Two more holes were drilled under the kitchen table, pointing directly at the chairs. Someone had strategically placed hidden cameras throughout the cabin. Panicked now, I rushed to the bedroom and got on my hands and knees to look under the bed. Just as I expected, 3 more holes were drilled perfectly lined up with a direct view of the mattress. Blood pounding, I ran to the bathroom and frantically searched again for devices, finding none. My mind raced thinking about the footage that had probably been captured of me. Showering, sleeping, dressing. Feeling exposed and victimized, I hurriedly packed my bags, left a scribbled note, and sped off down the gravel driveway. As I raced to the police station, questions flooded my mind. How long had this been going on? Were neighboring cabins involved too? Who was behind this disturbing scheme? At the station, I showed the officers photos I had taken and explained everything. They immediately sent a forensics team to the cabin and surrounding properties. It turned out to be an enormous operation, with hidden cameras streaming live feeds straight to the dark web. Over a dozen cameras had been carefully installed throughout my cabin alone. It was a profoundly unsettling crime ring invading privacy on a grand scale. I was just relieved the perpetrators were finally caught. Though I know places like that idyllic cabin hide sinister evils, I still yearn for simplicity and nature. But I don't think I'll ever truly feel at peace in someone else's home again. I was so looking forward to a peaceful weekend getaway at the cozy little Airbnb cabin I had booked. It seemed like the perfect place to relax and unwind from my stressful city job. The drive up to the cabin was incredibly scenic. I took the back roads, winding through dense forests filled with towering evergreen trees. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, nestled in a small clearing, I was delighted to see it looked just as charming as it did in the online photos. I hauled my overstuffed suitcase up the creaky front steps and fished the key from the lockbox attached to the door. Stepping inside, I was immediately enveloped by the pleasant scent of pine and cedar. The cozy interior featured wood-paneled walls, braided rugs covering the hardwood floors, and cute retro touches like a turntable and stack of classic vinyl records. Plush quilts were draped over the plaid couch and bed, adding to the hominess. Vintage skids and snowshoes decorated the walls, reminders of winters past. The galley kitchen was charmingly appointed with rooster-themed dish towels and utensils. Through the living room window, I could see the fiery colors of the fall leaves set against a stark blue sky. After snooping around and exploring every nook and cranny of the one-bedroom cabin, I decided to take a quick nap to refresh myself from the long drive. I curled up on the plush couch, nesting underneath a handmade patchwork quilt, and quickly drifted off to sleep, the comforting smells of wood smoke and pine needles filling my nose. I felt so content, excited about the peaceful weekend ahead in this beautiful mountain retreat. A few hours later, I awoke feeling rejuvenated and ready to properly kick back and unwind. But as I sat up on the couch, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I immediately noticed something amiss. My floral cosmetics bag, which I distinctly remembered leaving on the bathroom counter, was now inexplicably sitting in the middle of the cabin's living room floor. That was peculiar. I didn't recall moving it from the bathroom, but wondered if maybe I had groggily picked it up to retrieve something before my nap. I brushed off the seemingly misplaced bag and spent the rest of the late afternoon hiking along the wooded trails around the cabin and having a picnic lunch down by a gurgling stream. The tranquility of the surrounding nature was exactly what I needed to distress from my hectic work life. I strolled leisurely among the trees, breathing in the crisp air and listening to birds chirping overhead. It felt good to be disconnected from the outside world for a change. When I returned to the cabin at sunset, toes numb from a chilly creekside picnic, I decided to run a hot bath in the clawfoot tub to warm up. As I waited for the tub to fill with steaming water, I happened to glance over at the living room and noticed something else out of place. The colorful handmade quilt that I had carefully folded on the end of the couch before my hike was now draped sloppily over the back of the couch. Again, I racked my brain, trying to remember if I had relocated the quilt myself, but came up empty. How peculiar, I thought. I must just be very scatterbrained and forgetful out here in the fresh mountain air. I brushed it off again and eased into my relaxing bubble bath, letting the warmth wash over my body. But the next morning, that uneasy feeling returned gnawing at me when I shuffled into the kitchen and saw the sweater and jeans I had worn the previous day perfectly folded in a neat stack atop the antique dresser next to the couch. Now I knew something very odd was going on here. I never fold my discarded clothes, especially not tilly like that. My eyes darted around the cabin, scanning for clues that might explain these mysterious events. And that's when my gaze landed on something that made my heart nearly stop. A small wooden door, barely noticeable, built right into the pine wall behind the dresser. It was expertly camouflaged, hidden by the similar wood paneling, but still discernible when staring closely. A chill went down my spine, and my hands started trembling slightly. I rushed over to examine the door more closely. It clearly provided access to the space in between the cabin's interior and exterior walls. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone had to have been coming and going through these hidden passageways, entering my private space and touching my personal belongings whenever I was out or asleep. I started frantically scouring every nook and cranny, dresser, and closet in the cabin, searching for more of these illicit entry points. I discovered another nearly imperceptible door in the back wall of a bedroom closet that also presumably led to the crawl space between walls. My heart pounded as panic rose in my chest. I couldn't believe this was happening. I felt so violated knowing someone had potentially been spying on me, entering as they pleased through these covered doors. This was meant to be an intimate weekend escape just for me, but instead I had unknowingly been invaded in what should have been a safe space. My hands shaking, I immediately called the Airbnb host demanding answers about these unsettling discoveries. But Jack the host feigned total shock and ignorance when I described the hidden doors, acting completely perplexed and insisting he knew nothing about any secret passageways behind the walls. I sternly stated that I would be leaving his cabin immediately and wanted a full refund. But he just apologetically refused, claiming I had no solid proof of any actual wrongdoing. Frustrated and thoroughly creeped out, I hastily packed up all my things, constantly glancing warily over my shoulder, paranoid that whoever had been sneaking in and out might return at any moment. I tossed everything sloppily into my suitcase, not even bothering to fold clothes in my hurry to evacuate the cabin as swiftly as possible. My mind was spinning about who could possibly have access to come and go through hidden doors unseen. Check the owner. A previous guest, I had no idea, which made it all more terrifying. I drove 2 hours to the nearest town with a chain hotel and booked a room for the night, feeling my nerves finally start to settle once I was securely locked inside after thoroughly inspecting for any panels or hatches. Exhausted but still shaken up, I barely slept, tossing and turning all night while obsessively checking that the door was locked. I just felt so violated and duped. Angrily realizing this relaxing weekend getaway had turned into a traumatic nightmare. In the morning, still feeling shaky and paranoid after the bizarre ordeal, I contacted Airbnb customer service and recounted in detail this series of unnerving events. The mysteriously misplaced belongings, the discovery of secret passageway doors, the ambivalent owner. I provided photos of the hidden doors as evidence of the proprietor's alarming deception. Thankfully, Airbnb was very sympathetic and granted me a partial refund, acknowledging that this was not normal host behavior and fell well below their standards and guest expectations. But no amount of money could truly make up for the psychological unease I still felt after having my privacy covertly invaded by an untrustworthy host brazenly exploiting their access to spy on an unknowing traveler. Looking back, I should have known that overly unique Airbnb listing was too good to be true. At the time, the quirky nature of it intrigued me. The host photographs showed an intricately decorated home filled with lifelike mannequins dressed in elaborate costumes and period clothing. He described it as his own private museum collection, offering him one-of-a-kind accommodations experience. It seemed so interesting, especially compared to the boring corporate hotels nearby the conference center. When I pulled up to the property, I began to feel unsettled. The place was isolated, situated at the end of a long, winding dirt road far outside town. The surrounding area was heavily wooded and overgrown, with no other houses in sight. Tall, dense trees lined the road, their branches intertwining above to block out the sun. The isolation preyed on my mind and set my nerves on edge. The further I drove, the more I contemplated turning around. But having already paid for the week's stay and not wanting to find another option at the last minute, I convinced myself to continue on. After nearly 45 minutes of slow driving, I finally emerged from the thick forest into a small clearing. The house stood silhouetted against the trees, a looming Victorian structure whose paint was faded and peeling. The sprawling property had an eerie, neglected air, with overgrown landscaping and a weed-choked pond covered in green algae. As I parked, the crunching of gravel beneath my tires shattered the heavy silence. The sound of my car door slamming echoed across the still yard. I glanced around uneasily, but saw no other signs of life nearby. Just a silent house rising before me, seeming to watch me with unseen eyes. The host was already standing outside when I got out of the car, staring at me intensely as I approached. He was an older man, rail-thin, with leathery skin and greasy gray hair that hung limply across his craggy forehead. Everything about his appearance was off-putting, from the yellowed undershirt peeking out beneath his wrinkled suit to his overgrown fingernails, and the strong scent of mothballs that clung to him. His eyes were a pale milky blue that gazed out blankly from behind thick spectacles in obvious need of cleaning. As he silently led me inside, I fought the instinct to turn and run. His bony hand gripped my arm with surprising strength, making me feel trapped. The home's interior was even more disconcerting than the photos had portrayed. The foyer and hallways were cluttered with ominous relics, statues with limbs missing, furniture with faded velvet upholstery worn thin in places, candelabras with melted wax spilling over the sides. Cobwebs stretched across the corners of door frames and the ceiling, which was stained yellow from years of cigarette smoke. The air smelled stale and musty, with an undertone of decay I couldn't place. I hesitated in the entry, goosebumps rising on my skin as I took in my surroundings. But the host's grip remained firm on my arm as he pulled me forward, deeper inside. In the rooms beyond, lifelike mannequins were posed in elaborate vignettes, but their glassy eyes and twisted faces projected menace rather than whimsy. The bizarre exhibit seemed macabre rather than charmingly eccentric now that I stood among them. The content grew more unsettling the further we went. Deformed fetal specimens floating in glass jars, skeletons dressed in tattered clothing, grotesque medical tools, and implements of torture. With the host hovering nearby eagerly describing each display, I felt trapped in a nightmare funhouse I couldn't wake from. The tour ended in a bedroom on the second floor where I'd be staying. It was just as cluttered as the rest of the house, every surface cluttered with disturbing collections. The faded floral wallpaper was peeling away to reveal the cracked plaster walls underneath. Moth-eaten curtains framed a large window overlooking the shadowy woods. Figures lurked in the room's darkened corners. An emaciated mannequin posed as if crawling across the floor, a medical dummy with exposed, anatomically correct organs. When I asked for a different room, the host insisted this was the finest of accommodations. His grip tightened on my arm, fingernails digging in as if to prevent any chance of leaving. With no other choice, I acquiesced to staying there for the week. That first night, I barely slept. The lumpy mattress sagged beneath me, rusty springs poking into my back. When I did drift off, strange sounds echoed through the halls. Footsteps, creaking furniture, clicking and whirring as if the makeover exhibits were coming to life. I'd jerk awake instantly, heart racing as I peered into the darkness. Sometimes the shuffling sounds would stop just outside the bedroom door, accompanied by the stench of mothballs as if the host was standing guard while I tried to rest. When I woke, I discovered things had shifted ever so slightly, as if someone was entering the rooms while I slept. An anatomical doll tilted its head towards me. The skeleton's arm bone moved from its lap to the floor. When I questioned the host, he only stared silently with that same chilling smile that stretched his dry lips thin over yellowed teeth in a skeleton's grin. A cold chill ran down my spine. I longed to flee this place, but had no way to leave except my scheduled departure flight at the week's end. Until then, I was trapped. I escaped to my conference during the day, trying to regain equilibrium among other people. But returning to that house of horrors each evening filled me with dread. The entire drive back down the isolated road, my chest would tighten and my hands grip the steering wheel in white-knuckled terror. With each visit, the home seemed less quirky and more sinister. The host grew increasingly fixated on me, following me from room to room, always hovering just out of eyesight, though I could feel his presence like a shadow. His bizarre museum appeared more grotesque by the hour. On the third night, I woke to the host in my bedroom, murmuring that was his crowning jewel as he stroked my hair. I pushed him away forcefully and demanded he leave. He grew enraged, face twisting grotesquely as he screamed at me not to touch his exhibits. His milky eyes blazed with sudden violence, and I cowered back in fear. After that, I kept my bedroom door locked and the chair propped beneath a handle each night, hardly sleeping. But still I would wake to find him lurking just outside the door, humming tunelessly to himself. When I awoke on the final day to find a female mannequin posed outside my bedroom door as if spying on me, my skin crawled with horror. I knew I had to escape this house of horrors before I became a permanent exhibit myself. As I tried to sneak out, the host spotted me and flew into a rage unlike anything I'd seen, his face nearly purple. He became aggressive and threatening, ranting wildly about me becoming his newest display. Adrenaline flooded my veins and I reacted instinctively, showing him hard. He lost his footing, striking his head on the newel post of the stair railing. He collapsed to the floor, unmoving. I stood frozen for a moment, shocked by what had happened. As I stared at his motionless form, I considered calling for help. But looking around at the nightmarish displays filling the house, I feared what authorities would think. So I quietly stepped over the host's body and slipped outside to my waiting car. I peeled down that long, isolated road away from the house, watching fearfully for any sign of pursuit in the rearview mirror. But no one followed. I spent the final night cowering in a motel room registered under a false name, jumping at every passing siren and imagining I heard the host's shuffling footsteps seeking me out for revenge. I was so excited when I booked what looked like the perfect weekend getaway on Airbnb, a cozy cabin in the countryside with a fireplace and beautiful wooded views. After months of stressful work projects piling up, I desperately needed some time alone in nature to relax and recharge. The Airbnb listing showed charming photos of a tiny A-frame cabin with just one bedroom, and the description clearly stated it was an entire private home. No mention of other guests or tenants. I could already envision myself reading by a crackling fire. The woods silent except for birdsong. Just 2 glorious nights of solitude. The drive up to the cabin on Friday evening with spectacular fall leaves lit up the mountain roads in dazzling reds and golds. I couldn't wait to spend the weekend immersed in the peaceful autumn beauty. But as soon as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, my excitement evaporated. Loud heavy metal music was blasting down the hall. Empty beer cans and pizza boxes littered the living room. and gruff, imposing man was sitting on the couch looking irritated. Immediately, I could tell this was not at all the tranquil retreat I had booked. The man scowled, asking who I was and what I thought I was doing there. I stammered nervously and showed him my Airbnb reservation on my phone. Clearly, this was some kind of double booking mistake. The listing had definitely said I would have the whole place to myself, but the man said he had booked this cabin for the entire month as a long-term rental. There was no way he was leaving, so I would just have to deal with his presence here. I desperately called and messaged the Airbnb host, but couldn't get through. With no cell reception out here in the remote location and nightfall approaching, it looked like I was stuck here at least for tonight. I retreated to the bedroom, hoping the double booking mix-up would get resolved in the morning and I could still salvage my weekend. But sleep was impossible with the offensive roommate's raucous music and frequent stomping. Around 3 a.m., he started angrily yelling into his phone, the sounds echoing through the thin cabin walls. At sunrise, I tipped into the kitchen hoping to quietly make coffee, only to find this nightmare roommate had helped himself to my groceries and left the refrigerator door wide open all night. All my perishable food was spoiled. It became abundantly clear that there was no way I could spend another night here alone with this volatile, inconsiderate stranger who had essentially laid claim to the entire cabin. In desperation, I texted my best friend Sarah, explained the alarming situation, and asked if she could drive up immediately to join me. Thankfully, Sarah arrived that afternoon, providing some relief to my frayed nerves. But even with her there, we stayed locked in the bedroom all evening, startled by every bang outside the room. We knew we couldn't stay another night, but also couldn't leave since there was no cell reception and nowhere else to go for miles. In the morning, we were appalled to discover the man had scratched up Sarah's rental car, presumably as an act of retaliation. That was the final straw. We quickly threw our belongings into our cars while the man was still asleep and sped off down the gravel road away from that cabin as fast as we could. Once we got to a town with cell reception, I frantically called the Airbnb host to tell him about the shocking double booking. He didn't seem surprised at all by my account of the angry long-term tenant. The host confessed that the man wasn't even supposed to have the cabin listed on Airbnb the weekend I booked it. I've never felt so violated while traveling. That cabin was misrepresented as an idyllic retreat, when in reality I was locked in close quarters with an unstable, destructive stranger. While the host refunded me, it couldn't make up for the psychological trauma. I'll never again trust an Airbnb listing for a private room or home without being absolutely certain I'm the only one staying there. Who knows what could have happened if I was alone with that scary roommate all weekend without any way to call for help. At least having my friend there provided some small sense of security. But we were still isolated and trapped in a remote location, at the mercy of a volatile stranger hijacking someone else's property. All I had wanted was a peaceful weekend escape in nature. Instead, I got my food stolen, my friend's car damaged, and zero sleep because of a terrifying squatter situation that Airbnb failed to foresee. The dreamy photos and charming description were a complete fabrication. After an experience like this, I can't imagine ever trusting a vacation rental site again. From now on, I'll stick to vetted hotels and resorts, where I don't have to gamble on whether a double booking puts me in danger. This was an Airbnb horror story I'll be recounting for years to come as a warning to only book accommodation with reliable management. Sometimes savings isn't worth the risk of finding yourself barricaded in a bedroom by a hostile stranger. I learned that lesson the hard way, but at least now I can help others avoid making the same mistake by sharing my cautionary tale far and wide. I had been working nonstop for months and was desperate for a chance to relax and recharge. When I came across the charming little cottage on Airbnb, it seemed perfect. The photos showed a cozy, rustic interior with beautiful wood detailing. The surrounding meadows and forests looked so peaceful. It was just what I needed, a secluded escape immersed in nature. The host had great reviews too, so I booked the cottage without thinking twice. The drive there flew by as I daydreamed about reading by the fireplace, taking long nature walks, and doing nothing but sipping tea and staring out at the trees. But my idyllic vision started to crack when I pulled up to the cottage. The exterior looked worn down with peeling paint, overgrown landscaping, and a rickety fence around the property. I glanced back at my phone to make sure I had the right address. It matched, though the actual cottage looked nothing like the beautiful photos online. I hesitated before getting out of the car, suddenly feeling uneasy. but I had already paid for the 2 nights in full and couldn't get a refund this close to the arrival date. So I took a deep breath and continued inside. The living room was at least somewhat accurate. There was indeed a lovely stone fireplace as depicted. But the furniture was stale and musty, a far cry from the fresh, inviting decor in the photos. The kitchen was even more depressing with outdated appliances and dingy cabinets. The bathroom was nearly unusable with mildew and questionable stains around the tub. The single bedroom was furnished with just a sagging twin bed. This was not at all what I had in mind. I thought about immediately finding other accommodations nearby, but it was already getting dark and temperatures were dropping fast. With no cell service either, I was stuck at least for the night. I sent a stern message to the host about the misleading listing and inaccurate photos. But of course, I heard nothing back. I tried making the best of it and got settled in. I had brought books and downloaded movies as backup entertainment. But soon after night fell, the power suddenly cut out. No lights, no heat, nothing. I waited it out for a bit, hoping it was just a fluke outage, but the power stayed off. With no internet or cell service, I had no way to research other lodgings. I contemplated just sleeping in my car, but ended up crawling into the twin bed with all my clothes still on for warmth. I tossed and turned all night, moving from the cold seeping through the thin blankets. The next morning, I woke up stiff and exhausted after barely sleeping. The power was still out with no signs of returning anytime soon. I decided to try to find my way into town, but my car wouldn't start either. The frigid temperatures must have killed the battery. I was well and truly stuck now. I spent the day huddled up on the lumpy couch, bundled under every jacket and blanket I had brought. With no electricity, heat, or water, the charming cottage had become a miserable prison. I had never felt so helpless and alone. Night fell again without any response from the host about the ongoing issues. Furious, I left yet another scathing message about the dire conditions. As I lay in bed again, I realized I didn't have enough spare clothes or blankets to get me through a second night. I felt physically ill thinking I might actually freeze to death out here. I couldn't remember ever being this cold. But suddenly around midnight, the power suddenly returned. The lights came back on and I heard the heater sputter back to life. I've never felt so relieved. I cranked the thermostat up as high as it would go. I knew I still couldn't stay another day in this place, but at least I could finally get some sleep and make it through the rest of this horrendous stay. The next morning, I packed up in a hurry, eager to put this cottage behind me. As I loaded the car, the host pulled up with a smile and a wave, as if nothing was wrong. I confronted her immediately about the unacceptable condition of the property. She feigned confusion, insisting previous guests hadn't complained at all. She promised to get someone out to look into the issues right away. I told her not to bother. The damage was done, and I would be leaving brutally honest reviews everywhere. She offered flimsy apologies and excuses, but I had heard enough. I had never been so thrilled to get home and crawl into my own warm, comfortable bed. The cottage may have seemed charming online, but the reality was utterly miserable and potentially dangerous. I learned the hard way to thoroughly vet rentals, hosts, and listings before ever booking. It's just not worth the risk of finding yourself stranded without basics like heat or water. I'm sticking with reputable hotels from now on for any getaways, and I'll be sure to plaster the internet with warnings about that cottage so no one else has an experience as nightmarish as mine. It was meant to be a nice weekend away, just my boyfriend Jason and me spending some time up in Maine, taking in the beautiful fall scenery at Acadia National Park, and staying at a cozy Airbnb rental. After months of working way too much at my corporate job in the city, I was so ready to unplug and relax at this charming farmhouse apartment in the countryside. Little did I know that quaint farmhouse would turn out to hide some unsettling secrets that would end up haunting me long after we departed. The Airbnb listing photos showed an idyllic little yellow farmhouse with a big front porch, dotted with rocking chairs overlooking green fields. The attached apartment we'd rented looked bright and homey. It seemed like the perfect place to serve as home base for our weekend of hiking, eating lobster rolls, and exploring nearby fishing villages. When we pulled up the long dirt driveway, I remember thinking how lovely the setting was. The farmhouse sat nestled against the edge of the woods, surrounded by maple trees bursting into peak fall colors. An older woman with flyaway gray hair and owlish glasses came out the front door and introduced herself as Martha, our host. She seemed pleasant enough, if a bit laconic, as she gave us a quick tour of the apartment. The first thing I noticed was a lack of locks on any of the doors. Being a city girl, I was used to having lots of locks everywhere and immediately felt uncomfortable. When I gently brought this up to Martha, she dismissed my concerns with a shrug and said out here in the country, it didn't worry about crime or need for locks on internal doors. As she put it, we don't get any of that kind of trouble out here, dear. Though uneasy, I didn't want to come across rude or paranoid, so I decided to just deal with the lack of locks, even though it unsettled me. Other than the missing locks, the apartment itself was actually quite lovely. It was built into the hillside, making it bright and airy with plenty of windows. The living room had comfortable overstuffed couches and antique-looking furniture like an old farmhouse. Off of the main living space was a short hallway that led to the bathroom and bedroom. I noticed at the end of this hall was a plain wooden door that I assumed opened to a closet or utility area. After hauling all our suitcases and bags in from the car, Jason and I looked around a bit more closely as we settled in. I decided to open that mundane door at the end of the bedroom hallway, thinking I'd check for extra towels or blankets we could use during our stay. But it didn't lead to a closet at all. Instead, it opened directly into a dark, chilly root cellar with a dirt floor. The dank space was lined with crowded shelves holding mason jars filled with home-canned fruits and vegetables. I called for Jason to come look. The root cellar clearly extended far under the house. In the dim light of my phone's flashlight, I could see the earthen room stretched on and had a second door at the opposite end. We looked at each other with mounting unease. Why was our rental unit connected to the home's root cellar like this? It went from feeling like a cute farmhouse stay to something more ominous. Part of me wanted to pack up right then and there, but we were both exhausted after the long drive from the city and decided to stay. We definitely weren't going to sleep well with an easy entrance from the cellar directly into our apartment. As an added precaution, we shoved the heavy dresser in front of the hall door leading to the cellar just to barricade it a bit more securely. Needless to say, I barely slept that first night. I kept imagining someone coming stealthily up from the cellar into our darkened bedroom. Every small night noise made me flinch. Both Jason and I tossed and turned fitfully. I watched the first glow of dawn finally creep across the bedroom ceiling with relief. When we cautiously explored the cellar door again the next morning, we found it did indeed lead outside to the driveway, representing another disconcerting entrance point someone could access through the basement. My boyfriend suggested we ask Martha to keep the cellar doors locked, but I didn't want her to think we were afraid or paranoid. We decided to just try and ignore the uneasy feeling the root cellar gave us. We were determined to try and still enjoy our weekend away. Later that day, when I went to fix my hair in the bathroom, I noticed something even more troubling. The mirror above the sink had an odd double image reflection. I looked behind it and felt my stomach drop when I realized with horror it was actually an older two-way mirror. Someone must have installed it there to observe the hallway. I showed my boyfriend and we immediately decided we would not be showering or changing clothes with a two-way mirror there. God knows how long it had been there or who had used it to spy into our private space. We both felt our privacy had been deeply violated by the secret mirror. As we hastily threw everything back into our bags, I noticed Jason take down one of the antique rifles mounted over the fireplace, telling me grimly, just in case. We chose to leave right away without explaining anything to Martha. My boyfriend seemed worried about some kind of confrontation if we let her know why we were suddenly departing. I felt jumpy for the entire drive to find a hotel, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I know it was irrational, but I kept worrying we were being followed or that we had really angered Martha by leaving unexpectedly like that. My heart was racing and I couldn't calm down until we had checked into a bland roadside hotel many miles away. We ended up having a nice weekend in Maine despite the unsettling Airbnb experience, but I felt a sense of relief once we were headed south, putting it behind us. When I logged in to leave a review and saw other guests had described odd or creepy experiences there too, it made me feel less crazy. Martha's response to the similar complaints was just that she was an elderly widow living alone and needed to protect herself. I still love staying in unique Airbnbs when I travel, but now I am super diligent about reading through all the past reviews thoroughly first. I also make sure any unit has locks on the individual bedroom and bathroom doors, something I'll never again take for granted after that weekend at Martha's farmhouse. And I always travel with a rubber doorstop tucked in my suitcase, just to give me a little more peace of mind if we should ever find ourselves in another setup that doesn't feel quite right. Most Airbnb hosts are perfectly normal and hospitable, I know, but that unsettling experience in rural Maine taught me that you just never know what might be hidden in someone else's home or behind their smiling facade. Some secrets are better left undiscovered. It was a height of summer, and my family and I were eagerly embarking on a vacation to a new city we had never visited before. As our bus rolled into the station, we grabbed our bags, ready to find a place to stay for the night. In this particular area, it was common practice for locals to approach tourists getting off the buses and offer up rooms for rent in their homes. Sure enough, after only a few moments of stepping off the bus into the thick, humid air, a bald man approached my parents and I. Even as a young child, something about this man did not sit right with me. He had an ominous, foreboding presence from the start, but my father, exhausted from travel and not thinking clearly, disregarded the cautious vibe the bald man gave off. When the bald man stated he had a nice apartment nearby he could rent to us, my dad quickly agreed that we would go take a look. The man turned and started walking away from the bus station, with my luggage-laden father trailing closely behind him. My mother and I followed several paces back, neither of us feeling comfortable about this unfamiliar bald stranger. As we walked down the bustling street, we passed by a small cafe on the corner. The young waiter, who I guessed to be about 16 or 17 years old, suddenly rushed out towards my mother and I as we passed by. In a hushed and urgent tone, he warned us not to go with the bald man, explaining that the man was known around town for being up to no good. Hearing this, a chill went down my spine and I became terrified, while my mother's eyes widening with worry. But my father was already a distance ahead of us, walking alongside the bald man in the opposite direction. Not wanting to lose them, my mother and I had no choice but to reluctantly continue following. After what seemed like an endless walk on that sweltering summer day, we finally arrived at a tall, outdated apartment building. We trudged up countless flights of stairs, the air getting hotter and stuffier with each level, until we reached the top floor apartment the bald man had for rent. I instantly felt a sense of unease wash over me as we stepped inside the dimly lit unit. The space was cluttered with old furniture draped in mismatched colorful fabrics that made the room feel closed in. It was clear no effort had been made to clean or update the space in decades. After giving us a brief moment to take in the space, the bald man asked with an eagerness in his voice what we thought of the place. Before my father could reply, my mother spoke up in a firm tone that we did not like it at all, and would be looking at another rental instead. The bald man's entire demeanor shifted instantly when my mother stated this. His friendly facade melted away, revealing visible frustration and anger brewing underneath the surface. He insisted in an increasingly heated tone that we wouldn't find a cheaper place elsewhere. He pressured us to think about taking the unit, claiming he had other rooms we could look at in the building. But by this point, I could sense the raging desperation in his voice. My father finally told the bald man decisively that we would absolutely not be staying there under any circumstances. The man continued protesting angrily as we quickly gathered our belongings. We rushed out of the oppressive, dilapidated apartment and hurried down the endless flights of stairs, eager to exit the building as fast as humanly possible. Making our way back down the street towards the bus station, we passed by the cafe once more. The young waiter looked immensely relieved to see us leave without the bald man. He reiterated gravely that the bald man had dangerous criminal connections all over this town, so we were fortunate to get away. My father was able to secure us an acceptable rental nearby to stay in for the duration of our vacation. But I could never erase the lingering feelings of anxiety and claustrophobia that overwhelmed me in that apartment. The whole encounter left me deeply unsettled, making me wonder what sinister deeds could be taking place there that we narrowly avoided by leaving. While this was meant to be a simple, enjoyable family vacation, that experience taught me at a young age to always trust my gut instinct when something feels amiss. If a person seems suspicious or a place feels unsafe, speak up immediately and remove yourself from the situation as quickly as possible. My exhausted father overlooked the red flags that my mother and I noticed right away about the bald man. But thankfully, he listened when we voiced our concerns and got us out of it swiftly. Having my family there looking out for my well-being gave me comfort through the fear I felt in that moment. In the end, we did manage to find a suitable rental to enjoy our quality time together. However, I'll never forget the primal fear that overwhelmed me in that encounter, cementing in me at a young age the importance of following my intuition to stay safe. The chilling memory of the sinister apartment lingered in my mind long after the vacation ended, reminding me to always listen to that inner voice when danger may be near. I was so excited for my trip to Rome. I had dreamed of visiting the Eternal City since I was a little girl, enamored by the sweeping scenes of Roman plazas and ancient ruins in movies and in books. Finally, after years of anticipation, I was going to experience it for myself. My best friend Kelly and I meticulously planned every detail of our Roman holiday, from the Airbnb apartment we booked to the long list of sights we wanted to see. The date arrived and Kelly and I could barely contain our excitement as our plane touched down at the Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino airport. Lugging our overstuffed suitcases, we navigated our way to the city center to find our Airbnb. The listing had looked perfect online, a spacious apartment with modern amenities located right in the middle of everything. When we arrived at the address, my excitement wavered slightly. The exterior of the building looked a bit run down, with peeling paint and cracked concrete. I tried not to judge it just yet. After all, the interior could still be nice. Kelly rang the buzzer for the unit and a woman's staticky voice crackled through the intercom, greeting us in Italian. With some difficulty communicating in broken English and Italian, she buzzed us in the building. We hauled our bags up 3 flights of stairs to our apartment. My uncertainty grew when I saw the front door. It was made of thick, heavy wood with not 1, not 2, but 5 bulky deadbolt locks along the frame. That seemed excessive. Kelly voiced my thoughts out loud, joking nervously that the place looked like a bunker. I laughed anxiously along, though I felt a bit uneasy. We knocked, and the woman from the intercom opened the door. She was an elderly Italian woman named Paola with limited English skills. She gave us a quick tour of the compact 2-bedroom unit. The inside was modest but tidy, with dated furnishings and a small galley kitchen. One detail stood out to me. The windows were completely barred with metal grates. It gave the space an almost prison-like vibe. When I asked Paola about it, she simply muttered, "Per la vostra sicurezza," for your safety. Kelly and I exchanged a glance, deciding not to question it further. Eager to begin our Roman adventure, we dropped our bags off and headed straight back out. We spent the entire day seeing the sights, the Colosseum, the Roman Forum, Trevi Fountain, and more. By the time we dragged our sore, exhausted bodies back to the apartment late that night, we barely gave the odd door and windows a second thought. I collapsed into bed and fell instantly asleep. A few hours later, I stirred to strange noises. Half asleep, I thought I heard someone aggressively rattling the front door and fumbling with the locks. I lay there paralyzed, heart pounding, until the sound ceased a few minutes later. Too freaked out to investigate, I pulled the covers over my head and fell back asleep. In the morning, I asked Kelly if she had heard the noises too. She confirmed she had, but suggested it was probably just drunk people returning home to the building. Still, we felt uneasy. When we left for the day, we made sure to lock all 5 deadbolts and padlock the latch for good measure. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of sightseeing. We toured the Vatican City, tossed coins in Trevi Fountain, and ate the most delicious authentic pasta. I had all but forgotten the unnerving incident from our first night. That is, until we returned to the apartment the second night. Both Kelly and I stopped short when we saw the front door. The 5 locked deadbolts and padlock were still firmly in place, but the door was now chained from the inside. Neither of us had done that before leaving that morning. I felt the hair on my arms stand up, realizing someone had been inside while we were out. Terrified, we considered getting a hotel, but ultimately decided to stay. We barricaded the door with our suitcases that night and hardly slept. Sometime around 3 a.m., we were awakened by noises at the door again. Heart racing, I looked through the peephole but saw only darkness. The next day was our last in Rome. Neither of us wanted to spend another night there, so we planned to leave first thing in the morning. As we packed up hastily, Kelly peered out between the window grate into the street below. She gasped and fell backward. In the narrow window, she had seen a man staring straight back up at her, his face emotionless. We left the apartment in a terrified rush. I later emailed the host asking about the disturbing occurrences, but she feigned ignorance. That chilling Airbnb ruin what should have been a wonderful trip. I regret not trusting my instincts that something was off. Looking back, the signs were all there. The heavy-duty door, the barred windows, the chains appearing mysteriously. The host clearly knew strange things happened there at night, but failed to warn us. And who was that man watching from below those last few nights, trying to get in? I shudder to think what could have happened if we stayed longer. My advice is to avoid booking Airbnbs in unfamiliar cities abroad. No matter how nice the listing looks, you never know what you're actually getting into. The savings aren't worth risking your safety. Sadly, my once-in-a-lifetime trip to Rome will be forever tainted by the memories of that unsettling apartment. I wish I had chosen a hotel instead, even if it meant less sightseeing. At least then I could reminisce on my Roman holiday with joy rather than unease. I was so excited when I booked what seemed like the perfect quiet retreat in the countryside for a much needed solo getaway. The Airbnb listing showed charming photos of a cozy cabin nestled amongst trees and nature, no neighbors in sight. It looked like the ideal place to unwind and distress from my hectic everyday life. I imagined spending my days hiking the surrounding trails, reading books in a hammock, and finding inner peace in the great outdoors. After a tiring day of travel, I arrived at the remote cabin. Pulling down the long dirt driveway, the cute single-story log cabin came into view, looking just as quaint and rustic as the photographs. I stepped out of the car and took in a deep breath of crisp, clean air that immediately eased my nerves. The only sounds were birds chirping and wind blowing through the tall pines surrounding the property. It was perfect. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside the cabin, which was even nicer than expected with a full kitchen, wood-burning fireplace, and spacious bedroom. I knew this would be the relaxing getaway I desperately needed. That first evening, I prepared a simple dinner in the well-equipped kitchen as the sun began to set. I ate on the porch, watching the sky fill with vibrant pinks and oranges as dusk fell. An incredible silence settled over the land. I spent the rest of the night reading by candlelight, happy to be off the grid. I fell asleep instantly, looking forward to a full day of recreation in nature the next day. At around midnight, I jolted awake to the distant thumping of music. I peered out the bedroom window into the darkness, noticing unusual glows of light through the trees. The music steadily grew louder until I could make out the heavy bass line of a dance party anthem. Suddenly, headlights appeared as multiple cars roared up the drive to the cabin next door, which I hadn't even realized was there when I arrived. Hordes of people began spilling out of the cars, shouting excitedly to each other as they headed towards the neighboring cabin. Within minutes, a full-blown rager was underway, complete with blasting EDM and drunken partygoers. Shocked and furious, I grabbed my phone to text the Airbnb host and ask them to intervene. But it was nearly 1 a.m., and they were clearly asleep. The relentless beat of the music made it impossible to fall back to sleep. All I could do was toss and turn as the chaotic party raged until dawn. Exhausted, I got out of bed to find the woods now strewn with red Solo cups and other trash. I realized this relaxing retreat would be anything but if the neighboring cabin hosted rowdy parties every night. Anxiously, I texted the host explaining the situation but received no reply. That day, I tried my best to enjoy the peace and quiet, reassuring myself it was just a one-time event. But as evening fell, cars and people began arriving next door again for what was clearly the second night of partying. The deafening music started up once more, this time with a crowd that seemed even larger. Desperately, I texted and called the host asking them to intervene and stop the madness. But again, I received no reply, only the booming sounds of all-night revelry keeping me up until sunrise. This pattern repeated itself over the next several days. Each morning, I would clean up the mess scattered around the property from the previous night's rager, and each evening, the disruptive crowds would return to thump their music until dawn. No matter how much I pleaded to the host for help, my messages went unanswered. I felt trapped in an expensive nightmare with no escape or assistance. By day 4, I was an exhausted, frustrated mess. I had barely slept since arriving and couldn't take the noise and disruption anymore. I tried using earplugs and noise-canceling headphones, but the vibrations from the wall-rattling subwoofers still kept me out. I even looked for other accommodations, but everything nearby was booked up last minute. With no response from the absentee host, I was stuck with no alternative but to endure this hellish experience. Out of desperation, I started avoiding the cabin itself during the evening parties. Instead, I would go for long drives down winding rural roads just to escape the noise, returning only once the revelers left around sunrise. But my days were now ruined too by having to catch up on lost sleep, and the neighboring cabin only seemed to ramp up their ragers with bigger crowds each night. A week into my trip, I felt like a zombie. My relaxing country retreat had turned into a hyper-stressful nightmare of blaring music and chaos thanks to an irresponsible host. The person I had entrusted with my precious vacation time clearly didn't care at all about ruining my experience. Each morning my frustration mounted, knowing I had wasted so much money for nothing. I stopped texting the useless host altogether. Finally, on day 10, the neighboring partiers took a night off. Without the pumping bass and shrieking voices penetrating the cabin walls, I slipped into the first good night's sleep I'd had in over a week. But the next evening, like clockwork, the crowds and ear-splitting music returned for yet another night of madness. In the end, my country getaway was absolutely destroyed by the nonstop noise and disruption next door and the total silence from the absentee host. Instead of finding relaxation and inner peace, I returned home feeling more drained and irritated than when I had left. Let's just say I'll be much more cautious when booking quiet cabins in the future. And I certainly won't ever again trust any property associated with that delinquent host who ruined my precious vacation time. I had found what looked like the perfect weekend getaway cabin on Airbnb, a cozy A-frame nestled deep in the woods, with charming country decor and huge picture windows that let in the natural light. In the photos online, it looked like an idyllic escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I immediately booked it and started counting down the days until I could leave the stress of work behind for 2 glorious days of relaxation in the gray outdoors. The drive up to the cabin was easy enough, although the last stretch was nearly an hour on a winding, unpaved back road through densely packed forest. I didn't mind too much, though, as I soaked in the beautiful fall foliage through the car window. I piloted carefully around the rocky dips and curves, taking in the sights of the area. When I finally pulled up to the property, my cheerful anticipation evaporated. The cabin looked nothing like the photos. The once quaint A-frame now appeared completely dilapidated, with peeling paint and sagging eaves. Many of the windows were cracked or boarded up entirely. The railings on the deck listed precariously to one side, leaving me worried they would detach from the porch completely if any weight was put on them. This was a far cry from the charming oasis I had been expecting. I took a deep, calming breath and gathered my bags, trying not to prejudge. Perhaps the interior would still live up to the cozy atmosphere promised online. I gingerly made my way up the rickety front steps, avoiding the obvious rotted patches, and unlocked the weather-beaten front door. As soon as I stepped inside, I was met with a blast of freezing air. It felt even colder within than the autumn chill outside. Fumbling along the wall in the dark, I finally found a light switch and flicked it on, only to reveal a single dim bulb that barely illuminated the space. What little I could make out looked decades out of date, layered in dust and draped in cobwebs. The country chic decor was nowhere to be seen, replaced by dated, damaged furnishings that looked like they would be right at home in a horror movie set. This was definitely not the clean, bright, renovated cabin from the listing photos. My heart sank realizing I would not be getting the relaxing experience I had envisioned. "Hello," I called out tentatively, not actually expecting an answer. The host wasn't supposed to be on premises, but something about the stale yet oddly lived-in feeling of the space made me uneasy that I could be alone out here. I moved cautiously through the first floor of the cabin, jumping as the old floorboards creaked and groaned under every step. The distinct smell of gas became apparent and seemed to be emanating from the kitchen area. I followed my nose and discovered an ancient stove, caked in grease, with one of the knobs turned on and a steady hiss escaping. I hastily turned it off, hoping I hadn't caused any damage by inadvertently leaving it on for any period of time after my arrival. This explained why there was absolutely no warmth inside. In fact, I could see my breath in front of me. The enclosed porch area, which should have contained a hot tub, also smelled strongly of mildew and something rotting. I did not investigate further. The appliances, including the fridge, clearly were not functional either. Opening it unleashed an even worse stench and revealed molded, spoiled food that looked like it had been left for quite some time. At this point, I knew there was no way I could stay in this cabin all weekend as planned. I needed to get in touch with the host immediately so they could address these issues and make it right, either by refunding me to find other accommodations or by providing tools and assistance in repairing some of these problems just to make the space minimally habitable. I tried calling and texting the phone number listed on my reservation multiple times, but never received an answer. I kept dialing every 15 minutes, imagining how I was going to have to spend the night in my car rather than this so-called luxury cabin retreat. As dusk fell and the already minimal electricity flickered, I accepted this was not going to be salvageable. I loaded my belongings back into the car using my phone flashlight to navigate the dark interior. With no operable lights, appliances, heat, or running water that I could find, staying there simply was not an option. I drove over 50 miles to find the nearest hotel that could accommodate me on such short notice. By the time I checked in, after the long drive, I was depleted and overwhelmed, desperately craving a hot shower, a warm meal, and a clean bed. This is not at all how I expected this weekend to go. The next morning, still upset and frustrated, I futilely attempted contacting the host again. I left voicemails and sent pleading messages. No response. According to the app, my messages were being read, but none were returned or acknowledged. Filing an official complaint with Airbnb was my only remaining recourse to vent my anger at this completely unacceptable and potentially dangerous experience. They could not apologize enough for what I had gone through and promised to vigorously follow up to get me refunded. However, they did inform me that this host had apparently vanished without a trace, no longer communicating with anyone from Airbnb either. I made sure to leave a detailed photographic review online, letting future potential guests know what horrors could await them in this cabin. I wanted to make sure nobody else would make the mistake of booking here and ending up in such a mess. Though I was impressed with Airbnb's response to clean up the situation, I was so thoroughly disturbed by what had happened that I will most likely not risk using their service again in the future. After an ordeal like this, I will stick to the security and standards of chain hotels going forward. Rustic cabins in the remote wilderness may be fine for an adventurous spirit, but I now know that my ideal weekend getaway vision does not mesh well with the real risks that a trip like this can unfortunately entail. This frightening, frustrating Airbnb experience is certainly one I will not soon forget. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.